Have you been to Camp Beagle recently?
So I actually have a talk. I gave one last year at their second anniversary, and I'm giving one again called kind of fundamental reasons why we should stop animal testing. Sorry, I should call it animal experimentation because I'm not necessarily talking about toxicology. I'm talking about why we should stop comparing. I've kind of told myself that my whole Medicine Without Cruelty, I'm never going to talk about the three R's: reduce, replace, refine. I don't believe even replacement, if you think about it, we are putting the animal on a pedestal here, that they are the gold standard for scientific testing, and it's just not true. For me, it's getting rid of all of that terminology and that terrible language and just talking about why we need to stop and what is our future. I just boil it down to those two things.
Yeah, I always think that the moral argument should come first.
Yeah.
But there are good scientific reasons for no longer doing experiments on animals. I think fundamentally, even if animal experiments yielded benefits to humans, they would still be wrong and still shouldn't be done. And that is, and I think that's got to be put up there as number one.
I've come at it as a scientist, and then my eyes were opened, and then the moral argument alone was hard enough. When once you see, the curtain drops, and the curtain dropped for both the scientific and the moral argument. The scientific, firstly, just because of my job. Not that I ever, just making that clear, I never tested on any animals, but I was asked to in my PhD, and I left that PhD because I realized that was wrong. And then I realized how my life has had an impact on animals, and then, you just kind of go through the stages of living a more plant-based life. And, here I am, and I'll spend the rest of my life. I don't know whether to call it atonement.
Yeah, I think it's just, I don't feel guilty about when I used to eat other animals because I didn't know any difference.
Exactly. Yeah.
Point feeling guilt about. I think all humans have a duty. I see it as supremacism. The fundamental reasons why other animals are oppressed and exploited by humans is because humans consider themselves somehow to be superior to other sentient animals. And there's no moral or rational reason for that. There's no, that's a completely unethical and immoral attitude. But that's what lies at the heart of really all forms of exploitation and oppression of other animals. It's that attitude. And of course, that's obviously the attitude that drives animal experiments, because humans think, well, humans are more important than that mouse or that rat or, that dog or cat or even that fish, because there are experiments on fishes as well, aren't there? And it's because of that attitude. You have to challenge human premises and say, well, why do you? And of course, the other thing, and another thing I say to people, if I'm having a discussion with someone that's kind of perhaps in favour of animal experiments, I said that, whatever child's got cancer, it's always a child, isn't it? Wouldn't you want a mouse to be experimented on to find a cure for the cancer? And I said, well, quite apart from the supremacism thing, the other thing is I said, well, look, is it the fault of that mouse that child's got cancer? And so, well, no, obviously no. So then why should the mouse isn't to blame? Child having cancer? What are you doing? And I think it's very important that we not be afraid to challenge human supremacy, to say, well, why do you think humans are more important than other sentient animals? And let them come up with an answer. Say, come on, you tell me. You tell me why. And then they might say, oh, humans are more intelligent. And say, well, all right. So, what about humans that aren't so intelligent? What about humans that are actually less intelligent than other animals? What about humans that have got learning difficulties or very young babies? So it's all right to experiment. If we're going on the intelligence, it's all right to experiment on them. Oh, no. But hang on, I thought you said about it was intelligence. Now you're saying it's not. So, and they can't get out of that, if you see what I mean.
We have cured cancer in mice over and over again. We just can't do it in humans. And that's because we keep using a mouse.
Yeah, even if it was shown that there was some benefit to humans from that, it was still, because I think one of the problems, and because I used to do a lot of street stalls, against animal experiments, and I'd have people come up that claim to be a scientist. Oh, I'm a scientist. You're wrong. We need to have these experiments to cure humans, and all that. The thing is, I'm not a scientist. I don't know all the scientific arguments. So I never ever used the scientific. I just used to confront them on the moral side of it, because I don't know. They're quoting all these different facts and figures to me. I don't know whether it's whether it's true or not. I'm not a scientist. I don't know. So I thought, well, I'm not going to argue on science with them. I'm going to argue on the morals. I'm going to say, well, that's totally irrelevant. What do you mean? Well, how can you morally justify doing it? Let's talk about that. Because then in a sense, I got the advantage over them then, if we're talking about that. So that's how I do it.
The moral argument is so powerful. And I think it's so powerful that, if you really think about it, that the science is proving the fact that this supremacist argument that this narrative people are telling you about testing on animals, it's complete and utter crap, because it is damaging human health too.
I mean, I think the development of alternatives or other ways the experiments not involving animals is a help, because it kind of makes the transition easier. It's a bit like if you're talking about people adopting a vegan diet. My view is people should adopt a vegan diet for like moral and ethical reasons, and even if it's quite difficult to to sort of live socially as a vegan, which it was. I mean, when I went vegan in 1972, you couldn't eat out.
I'm very lucky the times I'm living in. I'm so
good. Yeah, we've done quite a lot of vegan stuff locally for vegan, and it's always it's bigger every year. And we still stuck to refusing to eat animal products, even though it was kind of you couldn't eat out. There wasn't all these vegan alternatives to cheese and meat and all that hardly existed then. And what there was, the small amount there was absolutely horrible. It's not. And also a lot of products lots of products now that contain vegetable oil, like bread and even like some sorts of peanut butter and other things. In those days, back in the early 70s, it was beef fat.
Oh, right.
Beef fat instead. And so there was loads of stuff that wasn't even vegetarian. It's loads like peanut butter. And then someone wrote. And the other thing in the early 70s that made it difficult was companies weren't obliged to put the ingredients on their products. You didn't know. I mean, that changed a bit later in the 70s, I think, but when I first became vegan. So you didn't know what was in stuff. You kind of had to guess. And we thought, oh, peanut butter is fine that we're eating. And then this chap wrote to the company, I think it was Sunpat. I think that was the only peanut butter you could get then. He wrote to the company and he got a letter back, oh, there's beef fat in it. And we couldn't eat. Oh, no, we've been eating beef fat. Because you wouldn't think that. But they did. Because it probably was cheaper, made it a bit cheaper, less peanuts and more beef fat, And so it was difficult, but like we stuck at it because we put the ethics first. We said, look, we're just not going to, buy into this. And so, that's really the reason to be vegan. But obviously, if you've got all these places that have vegan options, and you've got, all these substitutes for different animal products, the vegan substitutes, it does make it easier. And to me, that's similar to in a sense, to the non-animal testing methods. In other words, it kind of makes that transition easier in a practical way. It makes it easier to move away from animal experiments, the same way it's going to make it easier for people to move away from consuming animal products. So these things are very important.
Yeah, they are. And I can see that happening in veterinary sciences. At least there are, quite clear models that people now use, and it's kind of a, like for like replacement. And you can see it happening in science, but really what's kind of changing our world is AI.
Yes. I mean, in terms of probably a way that AI is changing in a good way. I'm not sure about other ways, but certainly it's one of those things that's got positives and negatives, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think that's a positive where it can be used in that way, And that's in terms of like modelling, is it? Modelling. Yeah.
Discovery. Shall we talk about strategies for anti-animal testing?
Yes. I mean, a lot of it's quite similar because, we've got a government now that's going to be highly resistant to do anything in terms of combating animal experiments. What can we encourage ordinary members of the public to do?
Yeah.
To kind of, help.
I do see where you're coming from about the government being highly resistant. And then I also see the power of the public, because it's only when it goes over 100,000 signatures do parliamentary debate. And we had celebrities, getting involved, and suddenly it just shot right up. Having the right people in power.
I think its petitions raise awareness amongst the public and get people on board that those people are needed. It's important to have lots of people on board. It's just that when it actually comes to the practical aspect of the government, taking any notice of it, they don't. It doesn't mean 100,000 signatures means that they're. I'm not sure they're obliged to debate it, but they usually do, don't they? When it's happened.
By law, yeah.
You see, so it gets debated, all right, so, it'll get thrown out, but it does raise awareness. So I don't see those things as being, totally pointless. I see there can be an awareness raising aspect to that. They sort of do, kind of do the two things at the same time, because we do quite a lot of stalls for our local vegan group at these dog rescue events, dog rescue fundraisers. They have these fun dog shows and stuff like that. And I'll always run a stall. I'll do the vegan stall, and I always do like a kind of Camp Beagle stall as well. And it's been to get signatures for the petition, because there's been 2 or 3 of the government petitions, hasn't there, going through. So it's always been, you've got people there that care about dogs, you see. So they're, because you've got, what you might call dog lovers there. And of course they see the posters and they, this. And most people, the attitude of most people is, they thought it didn't think it was going on anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, and I thought this ended years ago. Oh, this is terrible. I thought they'd stopped it all. Now, why people think they stopped it, well, I don't know whether it's because there's not been a lot of publicity about it. I don't know.
No, I mean, I don't think the people of Cambridgeshire know who their neighbours are over
No,
it.
they probably know a little bit more now who their neighbours are. The protests.
Dog breeding facility for.
Yeah, but you see, what I'll do is when someone signs a petition, the Camp Beagle petition, I'll give them information about animal experiments and some of the organisations that are promoting the non-animal, like animal-free research and
Of course,
safer medicines and people like that. I'll give them that information.
Yeah.
But like a booklet about veganism as well at the same time, because I think, well, those people care about some animals, so then their area of concern, really, or their passion, as some people might say, or whatever. So yeah, and I think you can combine things like that.
Yeah, no, I love the fact that you've kind of hit the nail on the head when you say education's the way forward. It really is. How are you going to empower individuals to make the right choices if you don't educate them on what's happening?
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think when we were doing the direct action with the ALF, all right, so it was directly impacting on the industries, on the companies, and in some cases it did force them out of business. But all the public saw was these newspaper articles about terrorists did this, and so there was no educational effect on ordinary people. It didn't really change the attitudes of ordinary people. That was what was lacking about it, really. Although I think some forms of direct action as well can, be a form of awareness raising if done in the right way. And I'm not saying that, burning a place down or anything like that, but I think especially where people do these direct actions where they wait to be arrested and they, or they give themselves up, or the illegality of it is like low level. And I mean, my wife's involved in that. I mean, she and some other women, there's a laboratory in Hereford, Ledbury, called Sequani. They have dogs from MBR. And they did a direct action there where they sprayed slogans with chalk spray on the outside of the lab, and they scattered flowers around and they handcuffed themselves to the gates. They all got arrested. And it got a lot of publicity. Got on the BBC News website, a small bit, but it got a lot, like publicity locally about the place. And, so that type of direct action, I think, can raise awareness as well. It has an educational aspect, I think.
Yeah. No, I don't think I've made a decision. I don't know if I'll ever go out protesting. I think it's whatever people feel comfortable with, isn't it?
I think we need people doing different things. And I think it's important for people to do what they feel most comfortable with, because that's what they're going to do best.
Use your skill set, I always say. What do you do well at? Is it digital media? Put out an Instagram post.
Yeah, well, I think that, as long as we're sort of all pulling in the same direction, there's different roles for different people. Even in terms of vegan outreach, that's the case. People are drawn to different forms of doing that, and it all adds up. And so it's a question of, I wouldn't be in favour of people doing anything they don't feel comfortable with, because I don't think I think there's something for everyone that they can feel comfortable with, to be honest.
Like I said, all roads lead to Rome.
Lead to animal liberation, hopefully.
That's it. Exactly.
And I think one of the problems is that we have a situation now where, going back to the 1970s, and there was also a rise in people becoming vegan then as well. And a lot of people became vegan through being involved in campaigns, like being involved in hunt saboteurs and being involved in anti-vivisection protests, because they rubbed shoulders with people who were vegan already, and then they became vegan. That was You know, a lot of people became vegan through becoming activists first, and then they became vegan. And so there was a big increase in veganism in the 1970s. But as I said, nobody actually campaigned for veganism. They campaigned on all these other things. Like if someone was a vegan, there was a very big chance that they were also an activist. See, whereas now that's not the case. So we need a lot more of these vegans to become active, and I think that's the key.
I completely agree. And I think, if you're happy with, adopting a vegan lifestyle, and if what you said, the fundamental definition of veganism is to not bring about any harm to animals, whether that's what you consume or, we agreed through science, it's, what your day job might involve in as well, then they should be comfortable putting out that message to the world however they see fit. We're not saying go out and start protesting, but they could petition.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do a lot of stuff locally, like we deliver leaflets, door dropping, putting through leaflets through people's letterboxes. We have information stalls. I encourage people to leave leaflets in public places, public transport, in waiting rooms, and put them inside the books in libraries, relevant ones and stuff.
Right.
There's all sorts of ways people can kind of do it that can easily fit into someone's, busy life and kind of are very, very low stress as well. And some people like the kind of, more out there, stuff, I mean, I tend to be the opposite of what I used to. I mean, obviously, what I did was like probably kind of highly stressful back in the day. I'm the opposite now. I much prefer the quiet stuff. And it can be really effective. It's not any less effective, but it's just what people are attracted to, really.
I think your life story is very empowering because it really just puts into perspective for me at least, and anyone else who's listening and kind of thinking about how can I be kind to the planet and kinder to animals. It really makes you think, what can I do? Like we said,
Yeah, we can all do something. It doesn't have to be like smash bang wallop. Right. I mean, for instance, we have people that are we got one person in our group. She's a young mother. She's got a part-time job. She's really busy, but she'll find time, and when she's got time, she'll go out and door drop some leaflets. She probably wouldn't be able to go on an organised protest or anything like that, but she can actually do that in the local area. So everyone can, no matter what their life, can find a way of sort of spreading the message. And I think if all vegans did that, it would add up. It would be huge because it would all add up.
Yeah.
But a few of them, so few don't, and just kind of are just interested in what's the latest vegan junk food in Aldi or whatever. I think it makes you feel good to know that you're actually actively, trying to, do things. I find it gives me a very positive feeling to do that.
I agree. My life has changed for the better. It really has. I feel good doing what I do.
Yeah, no, that's good. And so you should. As I often say, as far as we know, we're only here once. And life, what's the greatest, most horrendous atrocity that exists in the world is how humans treat other animals, isn't it? It's like, the numbers, like, absolutely.
Yeah.
What could be a better way of spending your life than trying to do something to end that? Don't do anything to end that, then you've kind of, you've sort of wasted your life in a sense, haven't you? That's kind of how I feel.
Yeah, I see that. I was just reminding myself of a quote that I put up on social media the other week. It's by Ricky Gervais, and it reads, "People who say things like, I can't worry about animals when there are humans who need help, tend to do F all to help humans either." I think supremacy that it's either a group of humans or the human race who decide that another group of animals, human or non-human, beneath them. And we either end up starting wars over it or destroying habitats or testing inhumanely on animals. It's coming back to what you said about
pretty much. It's all to do with supremacism, really. It's like, one group of humans don't think they're superior to another group, and so they'll oppress that other group, or they feel that they're the more important. And then obviously you get the same with other animals as well. And that's, supremacism is like really the fundamental problem that we have in the world, isn't it? It's kind of overcoming that and trying to do something to overcome that. And doing that something doesn't necessarily have to interfere very much with people's lives. I think it's something that can be fit. Some people maybe like to do the big stuff, and that's great. But I think taking action, to promote veganism and to promote, the proper treatment of other animals doesn't have to. That can be fitted in. Everyone's got some spare time. haven't they? We haven't all got the same amount of spare time, but everyone's got some.
There you have it, folks. You can either put on a big show and a big event, or drop a vegan leaflet to your nearest GP.
Whatever people feel comfortable doing and whatever they're able to sort of fit into their lives, it's just people being conscious of, like, how can I do my best to promote veganism? How can I do my best to promote animal liberation, given my own personal circumstances, really? And I think sometimes activism is portrayed as like a big smash bang wallop thing, and you either do that or you don't do anything. If you can't do that, then just go away. Whereas I try and encourage everyone to do something according to their own circumstances, and with most people it isn't. They can't do that kind of big stuff for another.
Sometimes the best action could just be share a post once in a while, something as simple as that.
Yeah, I think with social media, if we did one of the problems with social media where we have to be careful is it doesn't just become an echo chamber, because I know it could be different for other people, but I know say on my social media that almost all my friends and followers are vegans. I've been vegan so long, and my posts tend to be aimed at vegans rather than aimed at non-vegans, because I know that most of the people that will see those are already vegan. So it'll be stuff like encouraging vegans to become active, or encouraging vegans to understand what the true meaning of veganism is. Those things that are aimed, vegan consumption, so to speak. Whereas one thing that we do, our local vegan group does, and we actually started doing it during a lockdown when we couldn't get out and do anything on the streets. We started advertising on social media, making sure promoting veganism. We've done some actually promoting like anti-vivisection as well. We've done some of it, but mainly they're to do with veganism. And what you do is you have to pay to do it. Obviously, you can target non-vegans with those posts because they don't go to your friends. They just go. You can choose an area, and then they get put on people's news feeds. Basically, what we're trying to do is encourage people to go to visit websites. We've done one or two where it was to do with trying to get people to support animal-free research and stuff like that. I think we've done one or two on that. When it was around about World Day for Laboratory Animals, I think we did that kind of thing.
I seem to remember you also did something about the charities which still test, it's funding research that's done on animals and which ones to kind of avoid, or you might have put that up on a website somewhere.
We've got a few people that write letters to the local newspaper, and we get quite a lot published. We had two published just recently promoting veganism, but we've got this one woman that writes in about regarding the charities and saying, it's quite clever how she does it. She says that she's kind of said a lot of people are worried about giving money to medical charities because they fear it will go to finance animal experiments.
Yeah.
There are charities that you can give to that don't do that. And if you want to find more about it, go to, because Animal Aid have got this website called Victims of Charity. That's how she does it. And I think and she's had that same letter published quite a few times, because she sends it in every few months. And then they publish it because they might have forgotten about the previous time.
Updated, to be fair, there's loads of charities.
Yeah, but I think she's not like attacking anyone. She's just saying that, it makes people aware. Some charities fund animal experiments. Oh, I didn't know that. I don't like that. So, all right, look at that website. You see, they print the website in the letter so people can, so it's quite a clever way of, because she's not saying, oh, don't support Cancer Research UK, don't, because they probably wouldn't print the letter if she said that.
Yeah, exactly.
They've done it that way. She's done it, like a more clever way of doing it. She gets that letter printed. It's been published about half a dozen times, I think, over the last 2-3 years.
I'll have to link it in my website as well.
I've shared that. I've shared that on social media. And when my wife's done the anti-vivisection, she's done a couple of things, like she glued herself to the gate at Camp Beagle. MBI Acres, got arrested for that. But I always make sure it gets in the paper. I always do a press release, get it in the paper, so people get the message.
Right.
She's been in the local paper a few times, and it's still. And then there's been follow-up letters, because you get the laboratories say some nonsense, don't you? And then, kind of countering what the laboratory said, and then somebody else to write another letter supporting what that person said. So you kind of keep it going. You keep it going for a few weeks. To raise awareness. So I think a lot of people don't really use them, and local papers aren't as much read as they used to be, because a lot of people get their news on the media. But still sort of tens of thousands of people read them, and the letters, people tend to kind of read the letters page because they're sort of interested in what other people have got to say. It's one of the most popular pages in the local paper, so it's still worth people sending letters in. It really is worth it, large number of people.
People who do read newspapers do tend to, I mean, I know I do, I tend to flick through what other people are saying, what are the letters, what the little messages people are putting through to the newspapers. So yeah, I think it's fantastic.
And now you don't even have to sort of physically write, just email a letter in, that's what we do. There's all these different really simple ways of doing things that can be much more utilised, I think.
And you'll be surprised, some of them, some of these letters, if they're good enough, they end up circulating in other spaces as well. I'm probably talking about social media again, but that kind of snowball effect that it has with things trending is quite.
At the moment, the couple of letters that the 2 weeks running, we had letters in the local paper, and I'm sharing the post on a lot of the vegan groups on Facebook, really to try and encourage other vegans to write letters to their local paper to say, look, a really easy way of spreading the message that you could do. And it's once again, it's aimed at vegans and trying to encourage them just to do that really simple thing. Let's get a letter in the national papers, because of course, I suppose so many people send letters to them, but a local letter in your local paper, especially if the letter refers to something that's been in the paper, you've got a better chance of getting it published then. So that's what we tend to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
All these ways of doing it. And I think if we could create a situation where these charities no longer funded animal experiments, that would deprive that industry of a lot of money.
Yeah, if you're hell bent on choosing a charity, choose a better.
Just give to somewhere else, or if you want to support, medical research, give to one of the,
give it to animal-free research.
We can encourage people to do that. Then that will have a knock-on effect on reducing experiments on other animals. There's no them. We need a ban. Really need legislation banning it. Really, that's how it's going to eventually end, isn't it?
Bottom line. That is the bottom line. Yeah.
I think it can be replaced to a large extent, or kind of non-animal methods can be used instead to a large extent. But I think you actually want to make it so no one's allowed to do it. That's the final objective, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
It's a kind of steep look that, there's a lot to kind of. I remember when I first found out, because I became vegetarian first through my sister's boyfriend at the time. Well, he ended up being her first husband, and he was vegetarian, and that got me being a bit. It was through him that I went vegetarian, and then. I think 2.5 years later I went vegan, but I didn't know about. I just thought I didn't want to eat. That was all as far as it went. And then it was through picking up a copy of the Vegetarian Society's magazine that I found out about, not just about veganism, but about animal experiments. I didn't know about animal experiments, and there was an advert in there from one of the anti-vivisection organisations. I thought, what? This is horrific, So that opened my eyes, and I thought, I've got to do something about this. It's absolutely appalling. All these things that are going on. Against other animals, it's just, and that's what started me off. There kind of is a lot to learn about at the beginning,
It is.
And I think the other thing these days that's additional to back then is been to do with the environment, and is to do with, how human impact on the environment is so harming other animals. That crisis. The main victims of the climate crisis aren't humans; they're other animals that are being destroyed in various. And that's something that we weren't really aware of back in the day, and that's a huge area of animal oppression. Only fairly recently been kind of, we've only become aware. It's in the past few years. And I think it's very important. I think being concerned about the environment is very much part of the vegan ethic. That we need. That's all part of trying not to oppress other animals as well. That's another huge area.
Well, no, it really, once you open your eyes, you're so right. You kind of start looking at how your life impacts other people's, other humans and non-humans, and what is it you want out of this life, really? Yeah.
To me, the answer is you try your best to minimise your impacts. That's the number one thing. And there's some things you can do completely, and other things that like with avoiding animal products, that's kind of one of the easier things to do. But like other things, it's kind of harder to live in the world without. I prefer not to drive a car, but I have to because of
Yeah,
because of,
I see what you mean.
and there's stuff like that where you can't totally end things that you know are harmful, but you do your best to kind of minimize it. There's all that. There's what we don't do, right? What we try not to do. There's that aspect, but then there's the active aspect of like how we're going out there and trying to spread the message. So there's there's that kind of avoiding things, but then there's also the educating others as well, which I think is like really important to those two things.
We could have another meeting, maybe more specifically on education. That might be a nice one, because I feel like you bring the moral argument, I bring the scientific, and we can do something like that.
Speak soon.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.